The late afternoon sun, a brazen eye in the vast Wyoming sky, beat down on Benjamin's bent head. Dust motes danced in the golden light filtering through the worn brim of his hat as he leaned against the weathered fence post, the rough wood digging into his denim-clad forearms. The rhythmic creak of the windmill was the only sound breaking the endless quiet, a melancholy song that seemed to echo the ache in his own chest. Another dry year, another struggle to keep the ranch afloat. He ran a calloused hand over his jaw, the stubble rasping beneath his palm. He needed a wife. Not for love, not in the way the dime novels described, but for survival, for the ranch. He'd placed the advertisement in the Cheyenne newspaper more out of desperation than hope. A stark plea for a woman willing to trade city life for the relentless demands of the frontier. He wasn't looking for a delicate flower. He needed someone with grit, someone who understood the value of hard work, someone who wouldn't wilt under the unforgiving sun. Hundreds of miles away, in the stifling drawing room of her aunt's opulent Denver home, Olivia reread the terse, almost brutally honest letter. Seeking a ranch wife. Remote location, demanding work, no frills. Practical arrangement. Reply if serious. It was hardly a romantic overture, yet a strange sense of liberation bloomed within her. The alternative was a life meticulously mapped out by her aunt and uncle, a gilded cage with a suitable, suffocating husband. Benjamin Carter's offer, stark as it was, felt like an escape hatch. The photograph enclosed was small, grainy, but enough to show a man with honest eyes and a jawline that spoke of quiet strength. He wasn't handsome in the polished way of the city gentleman, but there was an undeniable, rugged appeal. She penned her reply with a swift, decisive hand, the scratch of the pen on paper a defiant whisper against the suffocating silence of the house. Weeks later, the stagecoach rattled to a halt, kicking up a final dramatic cloud of ochre dust. Olivia, her traveling dress coated in the fine grit of the journey, stepped down, her gaze sweeping across the desolate landscape. This wasn't the verdant valley she'd envisioned from her childhood storybooks. This was raw, untamed, magnificent in its severity. The small, isolated ranch house, a squat structure of unpainted wood, looked barely larger than a stable, and the barn beyond it seemed ready to succumb to the elements. Benjamin Carter stood a few yards away, hat in hand, his tall frame etched against the fading light. He was taller than she'd imagined, his presence radiating a quiet intensity that was both intimidating and oddly comforting. He cleared his throat, his voice a low rumble. "Miss Bennett?" "It's Olivia," she corrected. Her voice, though tired, held a surprising resilience. "And you must be Mr. Carter." "Benjamin," he nodded, a slight inclination of his head. "Welcome to the Triple C." His gaze, steady and direct, took in her city clothes, the carefully pinned hair, the delicate gloves she still clutched. He didn't comment, didn't smirk, just waited. The initial awkwardness hung heavy in the air, a palpable thing. The silence stretched, punctuated only by the distant whinny of a horse. Benjamin finally gestured towards the house. "Come on in. Long day for you." He led the way, his stride long and unhurried. The house was small, consisting of little more than a main room that served as kitchen and living space, and a single bedroom off to the side. The air inside was still, carrying the faint scent of wood smoke and dust. A cast-iron stove dominated one wall, and a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs stood in the center. A single window, its pane grimy, offered a limited view of the endless prairie. "This is it," he said simply, his voice devoid of apology or pride. He gestured vaguely around the main room. "Kitchen, living, that's the bedroom." He pointed to the closed door. "Your room." Olivia's gaze lingered on a faded quilt neatly folded on the bare wooden bed frame visible through the open bedroom door. There were no frills, as promised. No lace, no trinkets, no frivolous adornments. Just stark, unvarnished reality. A sharp contrast to the velvet and polished mahogany of her past. Yet as she looked at Benjamin, his face rugged and unreadable in the dim light, she felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in a long time. A nascent sense of possibility. This wasn't the life she'd imagined, but it was her life now, and for the first time in years, she felt a profound sense of having chosen her own path. A deal made in dust, and she was ready to see it through. The first weeks were a tapestry woven with silence and the creak of floorboards. Olivia, accustomed to the compact efficiency of a city apartment, found the ranch house vast and bewildering. The kitchen, with its wood-burning stove, was a formidable beast. She fumbled with kindling, smoke stinging her eyes more often than not, leaving a persistent scent of ash on her clothes. Cooking was an exercise in guesswork, ingredients scarce and unfamiliar. Her first attempts at biscuits were hockey pucks, her stews thin and tasteless. Benjamin ate them without comment, his gaze fixed on some distant point beyond the window. Cleaning was another battle. Dust, relentless and fine, coated every surface, a testament to the parched earth outside. She scrubbed and swept, her hands growing rough despite her efforts, the familiar ache in her lower back a constant companion. The house, ancient and imbued with the ghosts of generations, felt less like a home and more like a museum she was allowed to tidy. Each polished surface seemed to reflect her own awkwardness back at her. Benjamin, for his part, maintained the relentless rhythm of his days. He rose before dawn, the clatter of his boots on the porch steps the only indication of his departure. His return was marked by the heavy thud of the door, the smell of horses and dry earth clinging to him. He ate his supper quickly, barely meeting her eyes across the worn kitchen table, then retreated to his study, the low glow of a lamp visible beneath the door. His existence revolved around the cattle, the fences, the ever-present threat of the drought. Olivia was a new fixture in his home, a necessary addition, but one that seemed to have no bearing on the survival of his ranch. The wall between them was not made of brick or stone, but of unspoken words and averted gazes. They were strangers under one roof, sharing meals, sharing a name, but little else. Olivia found herself watching him, trying to decipher the grim lines around his mouth, the weary slump of his shoulders. She knew he was attractive, rugged in a way that spoke of hard labor and resilience, but that knowledge felt purely academic. There was no warmth in his presence, no invitation to bridge the chasm. Sometimes she would catch him looking at her, a fleeting, unreadable expression in his eyes, before he would turn away. Old Man Hemlock, a gnarled fixture on the porch, watched the new arrangement unfold with the quiet intensity of a hawk. He'd seen women come and go on this ranch, though never one quite like Olivia. She moved with an unfamiliar grace, even when wrestling with a stubborn broom, and her clothes, though practical, still held the faint echo of city finery. He noticed the way she struggled with the stove, the way Benjamin ate without a word, the heavy quiet that settled over the house when the sun went down. He'd lived long enough to know that silence could be louder than any argument. One afternoon, Olivia was wrestling a heavy sack of flour onto the counter, her arms trembling with the effort. It slipped, threatening to spill its contents across the clean floor. Before she could react, Hemlock, seemingly out of nowhere, was there, his leathery hand steadying the sack. He grunted, a sound that could have been anything from annoyance to grudging assistance. "Best to lift with your legs," he rasped, his eyes like chipped flint briefly meeting hers. "You'll be throwing your back out before the week's done." Olivia managed a small, breathless, "Thank you." He merely nodded, then shuffled back to his usual perch, leaving her to wonder if he was offering a rare moment of practical advice or merely stating an obvious truth. His presence was a constant, a silent observer whose judgment she felt keenly, though he never spoke a direct word of it. As the days bled into weeks, Olivia felt a growing isolation. The vastness of the land, the endless sky, the sheer silence of it all pressed in on her. There was no one to talk to, no one to share a laugh with. She missed the anonymous bustle of Denver, the comforting murmur of voices, even the smell of exhaust fumes. Here, her only companions were the rustling wind and the distant lowing of cattle. Benjamin's presence, though physically near, did nothing to alleviate the profound sense of being utterly alone. They were two planets in separate orbits, bound by a shared sun, but destined never to collide. The storm's fury. The sky, which had been a placid, washed-out blue just an hour earlier, now boiled with an ominous bruise-like purple. A low, guttural growl rumbled in the distance, a sound that vibrated through the very foundations of the old ranch house. Benjamin, who had been methodically checking the integrity of a fence post near the barn, straightened up, his eyes scanning the horizon. This wasn't just a rain shower. This was a storm, a real prairie-shaking tempest. He moved with a sudden urgency, barking orders at the two ranch hands still out in the fields, ushering the last of the horses into their stalls. The wind picked up, a vicious, unseen hand tearing at his hat, whipping his dark hair across his face. Dust swirled, a blinding, gritty curtain, followed by the first fat drops of rain, splattering like ink on the dry earth. Inside the house, Olivia stood by the window, a tremor running through her. The comfortable quiet of moments before had evaporated, replaced by a symphony of howling wind and rattling panes. The clapboard walls groaned under the assault. She had seen storms in Denver, but nothing like this raw, untamed fury. Lightning ripped across the sky, momentarily illuminating the sprawling, desolate landscape, followed by a thunderclap that shook the floorboards beneath her feet. Fear, cold and sharp, pricked at her. She pressed her palms against the cool glass, her breath misting the surface as she strained to see through the deluge. Then a flicker of movement caught her eye. A dark, struggling shape near the creek bed, perilously close to the swollen banks. Benjamin, a silhouette against the chaos, was already splashing through the deepening mud, his strides powerful but hindered. He was shouting something, but the wind tore the words away. He slipped, recovered, then plunged forward again, his focus solely on the distressed creature. It was a calf, a tiny, wobbling thing, its legs hopelessly ensnared in the slick, grasping mud. The water in the creek was rising, a muddy torrent threatening to sweep it away. Olivia's heart leaped into her throat. Instinct, sharp and undeniable, overrode her fear. She knew nothing of ranching, less of storms, but she knew an animal in distress when she saw one. Without conscious thought, she yanked open the heavy door. The wind tore it from her grasp, slamming it against the wall with a splintering crack. A cold, wet blast enveloped her, snatching her breath. "Benjamin!" she screamed, her voice a reedy whisper against the gale. He didn't hear her. He was already waist deep in the thick mire, struggling to free the calf. The animal bleated piteously, its eyes wide with terror. Benjamin strained, his muscles bulging, but the mud had a tenacious grip. Olivia didn't hesitate. She plunged into the muck, the heavy fabric of her dress instantly soaked and clinging, dragging her down. The cold seeped into her bones, but the urgency in her chest burned hotter. She reached Benjamin, her hands instinctively finding purchase on the calf's small, shivering flank. "What do I do?" she yelled, her voice raw. Benjamin glanced at her, surprise warring with a flicker of gratitude in his eyes. "Grab its front legs! Pull when I lift!" he hollered back, his own voice hoarse from effort. Her fingers, usually accustomed to embroidery needles and piano keys, now scrabbled in the cold, slimy mud, finding purchase on the calf's slick forelegs. The stench of wet earth and frightened animal filled her nostrils. "Now!" Benjamin grunted, and together they heaved. The calf let out a terrified cry, its tiny body straining. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, it began to yield. The suction of the mud released with a wet, squelching sound. They stumbled backward, Benjamin still supporting the calf, Olivia pushing from behind, until they were clear of the most treacherous mire, on firmer, if still sodden, ground. The calf collapsed, shivering but free. Benjamin's chest heaved, his face streaked with mud and rain, his eyes intense. He looked at Olivia, his gaze lingering on her mud-splattered face, her tangled hair plastered to her forehead. "Thank you," he said, his voice surprisingly soft amidst the storm's roar. It was the first sincere word he had ever offered her, and it cut through the din, landing like a warm ember in the heart of the raging tempest. Mending fences and mines. The dawn broke with a raw, biting wind that scoured Benjamin's skin as he surveyed the storm's aftermath. A familiar clench tightened in his stomach. Fences lay splintered like kindling. A section of the feed shed had buckled inward, and the yard was strewn with wreckage. He mentally tallied the lost hours, the ruined timber, the precious provisions, when a shadow interrupted his grim assessment. "Quite a bit to tackle," Olivia observed, her voice unexpectedly calm despite the widespread devastation. She was clad in practical, if oversized, work trousers Benjamin had unearthed from a trunk, and a flannel shirt, her hair pulled back tightly. He grunted an assent. "More than I can manage solo." Without further prompt, Olivia knelt beside a snapped fence post, examining its clean break. "We'll need new ones here, but some of these smaller pieces could be salvaged." Rising, she dusted her hands. "Where do you keep your tools? Any spare lumber?" Benjamin blinked. He'd expected her to retreat indoors, perhaps offering a word of comfort, not a strategic appraisal. He gestured towards a small, weather-beaten outbuilding. "Tools are in there. Lumber's mostly stacked behind the barn." To his astonishment, Olivia didn't falter. She emerged with a hammer, a pry bar, and a coil of wire, then systematically began clearing debris from a stretch of fence line. Her movements were far from clumsy. A deliberate, almost practiced efficiency marked the way she hoisted broken planks and wrestled with tangled wire. Benjamin, watching for a moment, found his focus shifting from the immediate chores to the unexpected side of her. He'd pictured a delicate blossom, a mere adornment. Instead, he had an active partner. By mid-afternoon, Benjamin found himself working in tandem with her, a nascent camaraderie forming in the rhythmic cadence of their shared labor. Not a single complaint had escaped her lips, even when a splinter found its way into her palm. Her concentration was absolute. When they paused for a sparse lunch of dried jerky and hardtack, Olivia cast a discerning eye at the precarious tilt of the feed shed. "We should brace that before nightfall. A tarp will only offer so much protection." He nodded, a burgeoning respect taking root within him. Her insights were pragmatic, her suggestions sound. He hadn't fully grasped the extent of his solitary burden until now. That evening, the ranch settled into a fragile quiet. Checking on the herd, Benjamin noticed a soft glow emanating from the main house. Inside, he discovered Olivia curled in a worn armchair, the firelight casting dancing shadows. She wasn't reading or knitting or simply gazing into the flames. Her shoulders trembled almost imperceptibly, and a quiet, choked sob escaped her lips. Benjamin froze in the doorway, a pang of something indefinable striking him. He'd witnessed many women cry, but this felt different, raw, unseen. He cleared his throat softly, startling her. She hastily wiped her eyes, her face flushed with embarrassment. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice thick. Benjamin crossed the room, pulling up a stool opposite her. He offered no hollow reassurances. "A tough day." Olivia managed a weak, unconvincing smile. "It was more than that. The storm, it reminded me of a different kind of tempest." She hesitated, then met his gaze directly. "My father was a very particular man. Everything had its place, its order. When things went awry, when the unexpected occurred, he'd rage. Not with fists, but with words, with silence." A shudder ran through her. "The last storm was when I refused the marriage he'd arranged for me in Denver. A man twice my age, with an estate he wanted to merge with ours. I said no, and he cast me out. Said I was a disgrace, a willful fool who'd never amount to anything." Her voice faltered. "He made it clear I was on my own." Benjamin listened, fragments of his own hard life flickering through his mind. He recognized the sting of abandonment, though the circumstances differed. He saw the defiant pride in her refusal, the quiet strength that had propelled her across half a continent for a chance at something else. He saw the woman who had mended fences all day, not for him, but for her own survival. He remained silent, but his steady gaze, devoid of judgment, offered a comfort more profound than any words could have conveyed. A fragile thread of understanding, born of shared struggle and unspoken vulnerabilities, began to intertwine between them. A shared hope. The oppressive heat of the day reluctantly gave way to a cooler but still breathless evening. Benjamin, his boots kicking up dust with each weary stride, was making his final rounds. He checked the troughs, tightened a loose gate latch, his mind still replaying Olivia's quiet composure, a surprising counterpoint to the raw ache in his gut about the parched land. He reached the far paddock, where Jericho, his prize-winning quarter horse, usually greeted him with a soft nicker. But tonight, there was only silence. A knot tightened in Benjamin's stomach. Jericho, normally a picture of equine power, was huddled in the corner, head low, flanks quivering. A sheen of sweat coated his dark coat, even in the cooling air. Benjamin's heart hammered. "Jericho?" he murmured, his voice tight with concern. The horse barely stirred, a low groan escaping him. This wasn't just a colic. This was serious. Jericho represented Benjamin's last real hope for a significant sale, a lifeline for the ranch in this brutal drought. Losing him, it was unthinkable. He sprang into action, his weariness forgotten. He led the horse slowly to the small, enclosed stall near the barn, his hands feeling for a pulse that was alarmingly thready. He grabbed the emergency veterinary kit he rarely had to use, his movements precise and urgent. He mixed an electrolyte solution, his brow furrowed in concentration, the flickering lantern casting long, dancing shadows that mirrored the turmoil in his mind. He spent what felt like hours, coaxing, rubbing, whispering reassurances to the suffering animal. Each labored breath from Jericho was a punch to Benjamin's gut. A soft tap on the stable door startled him. Olivia stood there, a steaming plate in her hands. The warm scent of stew wafted into the cool night air. "You haven't eaten since lunch," she said, her voice quiet but firm. Her eyes, shadowed by the dim light, were fixed on Jericho with a gentle sympathy that surprised him. "Can't," Benjamin grunted, his gaze never leaving the horse. "He's bad. Real bad." Olivia set the plate down on a nearby hay bale. "What can I do?" she asked, her voice devoid of panic, only practical readiness. He hesitated, then gestured to the pail of water. "Keep this fresh, and if he tries to lie down, try to keep him up. Walking helps sometimes." He explained the symptoms, the potential dangers, his words clipped and urgent. He expected her to balk, to retreat to the house. Instead, she nodded, her eyes assessing the situation with an unexpected intelligence. For the rest of the long night, they worked in tandem. Benjamin administered medication, monitored Jericho's breathing, and walked him in slow, agonizing circles. Olivia, without being asked, refreshed the water, wiped the horse's sweating face with a cool cloth, and even hummed a soft, wordless tune that seemed to soothe the distressed animal. When Benjamin slumped against the wall, exhausted and despairing, she gently pushed the untouched stew plate closer. "You need your strength," she insisted, her hand briefly, lightly, touching his arm. The fleeting contact sent a jolt through him, a warmth in the cold, fear-ridden night. As dawn painted the eastern sky in hues of soft pink and orange, a new sound filled the stable. Jericho whinnied, a weak but clear sound, and then, with a surprising burst of energy, lowered his head and nudged the water bucket. He drank deeply, then turned to Benjamin, his dark eyes clearer, more alert. A wave of relief, so profound it almost buckled his knees, washed over Benjamin. He sank onto a nearby bale, burying his face in his hands. "He's going to make it," he whispered, the words thick with emotion. Olivia, standing beside him, a smudge of dirt on her cheek, reached out and gently squeezed his shoulder. "He is," she agreed, her voice soft, a genuine smile gracing her lips. Benjamin looked up at her, really looked at her. Her hair was mussed, her clothes wrinkled, but in the pale morning light, she shone. He saw not just the stunning woman from yesterday, but a steadfast ally, a quiet strength that had weathered the long night beside him. She hadn't just watched, she had helped. She had shared his burden, his fear, and now his immense relief. The practical arrangement, the convenience of their impending marriage, suddenly felt insufficient. A seed, tiny but undeniably present, had been planted in the fertile ground of their shared hope, promising something far deeper than either of them had anticipated. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough with gratitude. "Truly, Olivia. Thank you." Winter's embrace. The blizzard descended without ceremony, a white shroud silencing the world outside the small ranch house. Snow piled against the window panes, obscuring the already muted light of late afternoon. Benjamin, leaning against the sturdy oak frame of the kitchen door, watched Olivia shiver despite the roaring fire in the hearth. Her city coat, thin and stylish, was no match for the raw wind that whistled through the eaves. "Looks like we're in for it," he rumbled, his voice a low counterpoint to the crackling logs. "Good thing I stocked up on provisions." Olivia nodded, her breath misting in the cool air that still seeped in from beneath the door. The journey from the station had been a white-knuckled ordeal, the tracks barely visible. And now this. A practical marriage indeed. Trapped. Days bled into one another, marked only by the changing intensity of the snowfall and the fading light. The vast, empty landscape beyond the windows became a canvas of swirling white, confining them to the warmth of the house. The ranch work, Benjamin admitted with a shrug, was largely on hold. The cattle were sheltered, the hay abundant. He found himself with an abundance of time he hadn't anticipated. They fell into a rhythm. Mornings began with Benjamin stoking the fire and brewing strong coffee, while Olivia, surprisingly adept, prepared simple breakfasts from the pantry stores. The silence between them was not uncomfortable, but rather a quiet understanding, a space for observation. He noticed the way her brow furrowed in concentration as she shelled peas, the quick, almost imperceptible smiles she offered when he recounted a story of a particularly stubborn calf. She, in turn, observed his quiet strength, the worn calluses on his hands, the way his eyes, the color of rich earth, crinkled at the corners when he genuinely laughed. One afternoon, the cards came out. Benjamin, a man of routine and physical labor, fumbled with the deck. Olivia, with a mischievous glint in her eyes, taught him a complex variation of solitaire, her fingers deft as she laid out the tableau. Later they moved to poker. Benjamin's earnest attempts at bluffing met with Olivia's uncanny ability to read his tells. Laughter, genuine and unrestrained, filled the small house for the first time since her arrival. Evenings were for reading. Benjamin, surprisingly, had a small collection of well-worn classics, histories and tales of exploration. Olivia, who had brought only a single slender volume of poetry, devoured them, her low voice occasionally reading a passage aloud, pulling him into worlds far removed from the snowbound ranch. They discussed the characters, their motivations, the sprawling landscapes depicted, their conversations extending late into the night, warmed by the dying embers and shared mugs of chamomile tea. The initial formality began to chip away, replaced by a tentative curiosity about each other's pasts, their hopes, their fears. Then came the sharp, biting cold. A frigid gust tore through the mountains, plummeting temperatures well below zero. Benjamin had checked the pipes daily, insulated them as best he could, but nature, he knew, sometimes had other plans. The first sign was the sputtering faucet in the kitchen. Then a complete halt. "Damn it," Benjamin muttered, running a hand through his already disheveled hair. "The main line must have frozen." He grabbed a blowtorch and thick gloves, Olivia following closely behind with a heavy quilt. The crawl space beneath the house was a cramped, icy labyrinth. Dust motes danced in the beam of his flashlight as he navigated the narrow space, searching for the frozen section. Olivia squeezed in behind him, holding the quilt draped over her shoulders, trying to funnel some of her body heat into the frigid air. "Be careful," she whispered, her voice tight with concern. The air was thick with the metallic tang of the torch and the damp smell of earth. He located the frozen pipe, a bulging section of copper. As he carefully applied the heat, the space became even tighter, their bodies pressed together for warmth and maneuverability. His elbow brushed her side as he adjusted his grip, a spark of unexpected heat igniting between them, unrelated to the torch. Her breath hitched, a soft sound in the oppressive silence. He leaned back slightly, his shoulder making firm contact with her chest. The small space seemed to shrink further, amplifying the sensation. He could feel the rapid beating of her heart, the delicate scent of lavender from her hair. "Almost there," he murmured, his voice rougher than intended. A faint gurgle sounded, then a trickle, then a rush of water. Relief washed over them both, but it was accompanied by something new, something unspoken that now hung in the air, a silent acknowledgement of the unexpected closeness they had shared in the dark, cold confines beneath the house. As they finally emerged, blinking in the dim light of the kitchen, their hands brushed, a fleeting touch that lingered long after. The warmth was back, not just from the thawed pipes, but from within them. Standing together. The creak of a distant wagon wheel, almost imperceptible against the hum of cicadas, was the first sign. Benjamin, wiping sweat from his brow as he mended a fence post, paused, his head cocked. It wasn't a sound he recognized, and every unfamiliar noise on his land these days felt like a premonition. He glanced towards the house, where Olivia was likely settling in, a new presence in the quiet, dusty expanse. He'd barely had time to show her the pump before retreating to his chores. A shrill, panicked bellow ripped through the afternoon air. A cow. No, several. Benjamin dropped his hammer, his heart seizing in his chest. Rustlers. Now? In broad daylight? He broke into a run, the parched earth kicking up dust beneath his worn boots. He rounded the rise overlooking the main pasture just in time to see 3 figures on horseback, their faces obscured by bandanas, already herding a dozen of his precious few longhorns towards the far fence line. His blood ran cold. This dry year, every head of cattle was a lifeline. Losing them meant ruin. "Hey! Get off my land," Benjamin roared, his voice rough with fury and desperation. He grabbed a loose rock, hefting it, but knew it was useless. He needed his rifle, but his rifle was in the house. From behind him, a flurry of motion. Olivia, her usually composed features etched with a stark terror Benjamin hadn't yet seen, burst past him, a cast-iron skillet clutched in her hand. "Benjamin, the dogs!" she cried, her voice surprisingly strong despite its tremor. He hadn't even thought of them. Old Man Hemlock, who'd been watching the scene unfold from the porch with a grim, knowing look, whistled sharply. The two cattle dogs, usually lazy in the afternoon heat, sprang to life, barking ferociously, their instinct for herd protection overriding all else. Olivia didn't stop at the dogs. She ran towards the rustlers, not with the grace he'd observed earlier, but with a clumsy, determined scramble. She began to shriek, a primal, ear-splitting sound that was more surprise than threat, but effective nonetheless. She waved the skillet like a madwoman, a blur of calico and flailing limbs. The rustlers, clearly expecting a lone, weary rancher, faltered. The dogs nipped at their horses' heels, and Olivia's banshee wail, coupled with her inexplicable charge, caused the lead rustler's horse to rear. The cattle, already agitated, scattered further. Benjamin, adrenaline coursing through him, saw his chance. He scooped up a handful of sharp stones and pelted them at the rustlers' horses, aiming for their flanks. One of the horses whinnied, bucking hard, almost unseating its rider. The rustlers exchanged panicked glances. They hadn't anticipated this kind of resistance, certainly not from the elegant woman who'd just arrived. With a curse, the lead rustler spurred his horse, yelling at his companions, "It ain't worth it! Let's go!" They wheeled their horses around, kicking up a cloud of dust, and galloped away, leaving Benjamin's precious cattle milling confusedly. The dogs, still barking, chased them a short distance before returning to their master. Benjamin stood panting, his chest heaving, watching the retreating figures until they were just specks on the horizon. He turned, his gaze sweeping over his unharmed herd, then landed on Olivia. She was standing still now, the skillet still clutched in her hand, her shoulders shaking, tears silently tracking through the dust on her cheeks. He walked to her, his long strides closing the distance quickly. She looked up, her eyes wide and luminous with a mixture of fear and triumph. Without a word, Benjamin reached for her, pulling her into a tight embrace. The skillet clanged against his back as he held her, feeling the rapid thump of her heart against his own. Her scent, a mix of lavender and dust, filled his senses. He felt a profound surge of something he hadn't anticipated. Not just gratitude, but an overwhelming rush of protectiveness, of awe, of a desperate, aching need. He held her tighter, burying his face in her hair. This woman, who he'd barely known a day, had stood by him, fought for his livelihood, for their future. His practical arrangement suddenly felt profoundly, terrifyingly real, and far more precious than he'd ever allowed himself to imagine. He didn't want to let her go. He couldn't. The lingering dust, kicked up by the departing rustlers, mirrored the upheaval in Benjamin's spirit. He faced Olivia, the pine-scented air heavy with their unspoken ordeal. Her face, smudged with grime and streaked with tears, held an unvarnished beauty that seized his gaze. He yearned to reach out, to erase the marks of distress, to smooth away her worry, but a tremor held his hand captive. "Olivia," he began, his voice raspy, "what we just endured, this wasn't the life I envisioned for you, for us." He gestured vaguely at the rugged landscape, at the ranch meant to be a refuge, a practical solution. "This existence, it's harsh, far more so than I ever let on." Her blue eyes, shimmering with an intensity that penetrated his carefully built defenses, met his. "I know it's harsh, Benjamin. I always knew it would be. But I also know I wouldn't have wanted to face it with anyone else. A fresh tear escaped, carving a clean path down her cheek. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic rhythm demanding release. He took a hesitant step closer. Olivia, when I saw you out there, confronting those men, when I thought I might lose you. He trailed off, the terror that had gripped him, the profound ache of a future suddenly barren without her, too vast for words. It ceased to be merely about the ranch. It wasn't about a convenient arrangement. He swallowed hard, the confession clawing its way free. I love you, Olivia. It struck me then, as clear as the dawn. I love you. The declaration hung in the crisp mountain air, a fragile, momentous truth. Olivia's breath hitched. Her hand flew to her mouth, stifling a sob. Her eyes, wide and luminous, searched his, seeking confirmation, finding only raw, unvarnished honesty. Benjamin, she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. I was so afraid. Not just of them, but of what was stirring within me. She drew a shaky breath, her chest rising and falling. I came here seeking independence, a new beginning, practicality. I never expected to feel this. Tears streamed down her face now, not of fear, but of profound relief and burgeoning joy. I love you too, Benjamin. God help me, I love you. The words were a release, a dam breaking within both of them. Benjamin closed the distance in 2 swift strides. His calloused, strong hands cupped her face, his thumbs gently stroking her damp skin. Her own hands rose, finding purchase on his forearms, clinging to him as if he were the sole anchor in a world suddenly spinning. His eyes, usually so guarded, were open and vulnerable, reflecting the depth of his devotion. He leaned in, slowly, granting her every chance to withdraw. But she only leaned further, her eyelids fluttering shut. Their lips met, tentative at first, a soft brushing, a question asked and answered in the same breath. This was not the hurried, desperate kiss born of shared terror. This was an entirely different communion, tender, an exploration, a quiet unfolding. His lips were soft against hers, tasting of dust and promises yet to be spoken. Her mouth parted slightly, an invitation he accepted, deepening the kiss with a gentle pressure that spoke volumes. It was a kiss of confession, of acceptance, of a profound understanding that transcended words. The kiss of 2 souls finding their way home. When they finally broke apart, breathless, their foreheads rested together, eyes still closed. The world outside them, the battered ranch, the distant mountains, the lingering threat receded. There was only the warmth of her breath on his cheek, the steady beat of his heart echoing hers. A promise of spring, Olivia murmured, her voice thick with emotion, eyes still closed. Benjamin pulled back just enough to look at her, a soft smile gracing his lips, a smile she'd never witnessed, one that reached his eyes and made them shine. A promise of everything, he corrected gently, tightening his hold, pulling her close against his chest. He held her there, feeling the rapid flutter of her heart against his own. A silent vow passing between them, a future stretching out, richer and more vibrant than either of them had dared to dream. The practical arrangement had vanished, replaced by something infinitely more precious, something real, something rooted in love. Blooming together. The first blush of dawn painted the eastern sky in hues of rose and gold, chasing away the lingering chill of the spring night. A gentle breeze, redolent with the scent of damp earth and nascent blossoms, rustled through the newly unfurled leaves of the cottonwoods lining the creek bed. Winter's stark palette had given way to a vibrant tapestry of green, dotted with the defiant purples of wild iris and the cheerful yellows of dandelions. The ranch, once a landscape of muted browns and grays, now vibrated with life. Calves, wobbly-legged and curious, chased each other through pastures thick with new grass, their bleats a cheerful counterpoint to the chirping of meadowlarks. Benjamin stood on the porch, a steaming mug of coffee warming his hands. The familiar ache in his shoulders had eased, replaced by a deep sense of contentment he hadn't known possible just a year ago. Olivia joined him, her hand slipping naturally into his, her touch a comforting warmth. She leaned her head against his arm, her gaze sweeping across the awakening ranch with the same proprietary pride that swelled within him. "Looks like we're in for a good year, Ben," she murmured, her voice soft as the morning light. He squeezed her hand. "It feels like it, doesn't it? The ground's soaked up enough, and the new fencing, we're finally ahead of the curve." Their conversations no longer revolved around logistics and survival, but dreams. They spoke of expanding the herd, of building a proper barn for the new mares, of the small, sun-drenched patch of land Olivia envisioned for a robust kitchen garden. Each plan, each shared ambition, wove another thread into the rich fabric of their life together. The practicality that had bound them initially had given way to an unspoken language of understanding, a love that had taken root in the most challenging of soils and now bloomed with astonishing resilience. Later that afternoon, they walked hand in hand along the newly mended fence line, the sun warm on their faces. The ancient oak, a sentinel overlooking the south pasture, spread its burgeoning canopy, its gnarled branches reaching skyward like a testament to enduring strength. It was a silent witness to their burgeoning love, as steadfast and true as its own deep roots. "Remember that first day?" Olivia asked, a playful glint in her eyes. "You looked like you'd seen a ghost, and I was sure I'd made the biggest mistake of my life." Benjamin chuckled, the sound rich and warm. "You looked like you were ready to bolt back to Denver at the first opportunity, and old man Hemlock was whistling at the dogs just to add to the chaos." "He still does that, you know," she said, nudging him with her shoulder. "Only now, I think he does it because he likes the sound of it." They paused by the sturdy planks of the fence, the wood warm beneath their fingertips. Benjamin turned to her, his gaze tender, full of an emotion that still surprised him with its depth. "You didn't bolt, Olivia. You stayed. You built something here, with me. Something real." She met his gaze, her own eyes shining. "We built it together, Ben. We faced down the drought, the broken machinery, the endless days. We learned to rely on each other, to trust. And somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing a practical arrangement and started seeing home." He pulled her into his embrace, holding her close, inhaling the faint scent of wildflowers and sunshine that clung to her hair. He remembered the rigid tension that had once defined her, the guardedness in her eyes. Now she melted against him, pliant and free. The transformation was profound, a testament to the love that had silently, powerfully grown between them. Sarah May, bustling out from the main house with a plate of her infamous molasses cookies, waved vigorously from the porch. "Lunch is nearly ready, you two. Don't want those beautiful wildflowers wilting in the sun." They laughed, a shared sound of joy and easy familiarity. This was their life now, a symphony of hard work, quiet moments, and shared laughter. Benjamin looked at Olivia, his beloved wife, his true partner. Her eyes, once shadowed with uncertainty, now held a bright, unwavering determination. She stood by the fence, her hands still intertwined with his, her spirit as vibrant as the spring blooms surrounding them. The future stretched before them, not as a daunting unknown, but as a fertile field ripe with promise. Together, they were ready for anything.